Halo, assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang para viewers. Kembali lagi bersama saya Yudi di channel ayudx. Ya, karena bosan Dota kalah terus. Mungkin masih pada libur Lebaran ya, jadi para bocah masih main ya dan membeli akun. Jadi tidak peduli akunnya kalah atau menang. Mereka mah have fun ya, senang. Oke. Kalau begitu kita hari ini saya akan bermain SPEC ya, SPEC di Amerika. Enjoy the game dan selamat menonton. Ini gelap nggak ya? Gelap. Yuk, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Hello, I'm David Harper with the BBC News. MSF, or Doctors Without Borders, has found acute malnourishment to be so widespread in civil war-ravaged Sudan that it reaches double the threshold for a nutrition emergency. The agency is warning of a hunger crisis much worse than feared. Barbara Platt-Usher reports.
At least one child dies every 2 hours in the Zamzam camp for displaced people, according to Doctors Without Borders. It has just completed a mass screening of mothers and children under 5 and found 1/3 of them to be acutely malnourished. Sudan's conflict has displaced millions of people, ruined the economy, and blocked aid to vulnerable populations. Humanitarian workers say it will not be possible to turn the tide on this catastrophe unless there is a surge of food supplies and much greater access to deliver it.
Argentina's second highest court has held Iran responsible for 2 attacks in Buenos Aires in the 1990s, suicide bombings at the Israeli embassy and a Jewish center. Here's Sanjay Dasgupta.
The attack on the Israeli embassy in 1992 killed at least 29 people. The victims included Israeli diplomats, embassy staff, clergy, worshippers, children, and passers-by. 2 years later, when a van laden with bombs was driven into the building of the Jewish center, more than 85 people died. It was the worst atrocity ever perpetrated on Argentine soil. More than 500 were injured in the 2 attacks. The court upheld an earlier ruling holding the attacks to be crimes against humanity. The judges declared Iran to be a terrorist state and implicated the Shia Hezbollah movement.
The Israeli defense minister has told his US counterpart that Israel will respond appropriately if attacked by Iran. Yoav Gallant was assured that Israel could count on full US support, but Washington continues to try to dissuade Iran from launching a retaliatory strike following last week's attack on its consulate in Syria. Hugo Bushega is in Jerusalem.
American officials are warning that an Iranian response is a matter of when, not if. This would be a dangerous escalation in the long-running tensions between the two countries. But diplomats are seeking to avert a wider conflict. The US Secretary of State has urged countries to persuade Iran not to escalate. The Iranian foreign minister, after calls with his British, German and Australian counterparts, said Iran was not seeking an increase in hostilities. As fears of an attack continue, the US has restricted travel for its embassy staff in Israel.
The Ukrainian military says there have been more Russian airstrikes against energy infrastructure. A facility outside Dnipro is ablaze after it was hit by what the authorities described as drone debris. On Thursday, President Putin said airstrikes on the energy grid are part of Moscow's attempts to demilitarize Ukraine. Mr. Putin said the strikes were a response to Ukraine targeting Russian energy infrastructure. BBC News. The Russian authorities have expressed concern that the Kurgan region in western Siberia could be flooded in the coming days. The village of Kaminska is being evacuated after water levels on the Tobol River rose 1.4 meters overnight. In the Ural city of Orenburg, home to 500,000 people, water levels have reached dangerous levels. President Biden has promised to defend Manila from any attack in the South China Sea, where its vessels have been repeatedly harassed by China. Hosting President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida at the White House, Mr. Biden pledged his commitment to allies in the region. Regan Morris reports.
President Biden said that the U.S. defense commitment to Japan and the Philippines was ironclad and that the U.S. would defend its allies in the Pacific. His remarks came as he hosted the first ever trilateral summit between the countries amid rising tensions with Beijing. The three leaders called the meeting historic and said that they would hold joint training exercises and bolster economic ties. Multiple Asian countries claim territory in the South China Sea, and China has in the past blamed the U.S. for stoking tensions in the region.
The head of China's rubber stamp parliament, the National People's Congress, is in Pyongyang for talks with his North Korean counterpart. It's one of the highest level contacts between the allies in recent years. Officially, the talks will focus on promoting exchange and cooperation. The two countries are marking 75 years of diplomatic ties. A court in Peru has handed down sentences of 28 years each to 5 men who are being retried for the murders of indigenous activists. The leaders of the Ashaninka people were killed in front of members of their community in 2014, close to Peru's border with Brazil. The 5 accused had been convicted of their murder last year, but an appeals court had ordered a retrial. And that's the latest. BBC News.
Thank you, David, for that news. Hello, welcome, Namaste to Newsday. You with James Copnell and Lina Gupta. Thank you for being with us. In this hour, we'll be talking about 2 conflicts. In Sudan first, where there's a hunger crisis emergency now. We go to Darfur, where a correspondent has got a rare access to a refugee camp. And then Gaza conflict, we get latest from Israel on that. Also, 10 years on, after nearly 300 schoolgirls were kidnapped in Chibok in Nigeria, how are those who have managed to be released coping? We welcome your messages. Our text and WhatsApp number on all these stories are +44 77 86 20 15 85. So stay with us.
The leading international aid organisation is warning that a catastrophic hunger crisis in Sudan is even worse than feared. Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, has screened tens of thousands of children and women in a displaced people's camp in North Darfur state. It found a third were malnourished. That's double the threshold for what is known as a nutrition emergency. On Monday, it will mark a year since the conflict in Sudan broke out. It's had a devastating humanitarian impact across the country, with the western region of Darfur being a hotspot for conflict and for suffering. It's very difficult for outsiders to get access there, but the BBC has managed to get some material from Darfur using the work of a local freelance cameraman. So from the report, this is the account of Kisma Abdurrahman Ali Abu Bakr, a mother in Darfur who lost 3 children to malnutrition.
I have 3 children who have died. My 3-year-old daughter died after 11 days of falling sick. The second one was 2 years old. He died from malnutrition. I couldn't take them to the hospital. After that, I had a daughter who died. She was 6 months old. Because I have another boy, I came with him here. People are exhausted, bewildered, and hungry. They are all suffering from hunger. This is why they came here. People live on borrowing today to pay back tomorrow. This is how they survive. Our conditions are not allowing us to visit the doctor. We are all the same, just living like this.
Well, that clip came from a report by our correspondent, Barbara Plett-Usher, and she joins us now. Welcome back to Newsday. Give us your assessment then of the extent of the problem here.
Hi, James. So the Doctors Without Borders did their study on the Zamzam refugee camp, which has about 300,000 people. It's an old camp set up about 20 years ago, but it has been really affected by the war because it was dependent on food aid, and a lot of that food aid, almost all of it basically, has been cut off because of the conflict. So they did a measurement of malnutrition, a mass screening of more than 60,000 children and women, and they came out with those figures that around a third of the children under 5 are acutely malnourished. Actually, about 40% under 2 are acutely malnourished, and breastfeeding and pregnant women are also around 30% malnourished, which is a staggering figure. They also have another category called severe acute malnutrition. They said 8% of children were suffering from that, and in this category, if you don't get to medical treatment from 6 to 8 weeks, then you could die. So there is an issue in the camp, which is already fragile because it had been dependent on aid, but there's a wider issue in Darfur, of course, where they haven't been able to take those kinds of studies. Many millions of people have been displaced and are living in camps. The infrastructure, the farming, the food stores have all are all been compromised severely. So it is an indication that that there is a crisis, and it is something the UN has been warning about a looming famine for some time.
And to be clear, this looming famine is man-made. This is because of the conflict.
Yes, that is true. It should be said that Sudan was already quite fragile before the conflict started because of previous conflicts, because of poverty, and so on. So there was a huge amount of international aid that was going into the country on which people were dependent. But this conflict has done a number of things. It has blocked that aid from coming in, and the international community blames both sides for being obstructive. In particular, in the recent months, the Sudanese army, because it closed off some of the access points on the Chad border, it said, to prevent weapons from being smuggled in, but that meant food couldn't come in either, although that has eased recently. So there's that. But then there's also the destruction of civilian infrastructure, especially health services. 70 to 80% of the hospitals aren't functioning. And you heard in that clip there, the Kisba, she was saying that she couldn't get to hospitals, she couldn't afford the medicine. I mean, I think her children would not have died if they'd had medical care, and that is something that the MSF, the Doctors Without Borders, has also really stressed. So it's the infrastructure and most immediately just the lack of food supply.
Yeah, well, we had a couple of messages in on this. One from Martin Manyad-Wugul in Juba, who says, because of this human suffering in Sudan, the war has to stop immediately. Enough is enough. And Alfred in the United States says the war in Sudan is heartbreaking. Those good-for-nothing generals, what are they fighting for? The next generation is being wiped out. The generals should be held accountable. Now, referring to Fatah al-Burhan of the Sudanese Armed Forces, and Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, or Hemeti of the Rapid Support Forces, this paramilitary or militia group, the two sides. And I suppose that takes us to the question about what is being done to bring an end to the conflict.
Well, you know very well, don't you, that those talks that have tried to get an end to the conflict all year, various attempts from various different mediators, have always failed. There is another one possibly in the works. The Americans are organizing it with the Saudis. The U.S. envoy for Sudan said he hoped that it could begin on April 18th after Ramadan, and that this time they would bring more regional players into the talks. They had been, the U.S.-sponsored ones had been focused pretty much with U.S. and Saudi Arabia. In particular, they're going to bring in Egypt and the United Arab Emirates, which are important backers of both sides. Egypt supports the army. The United Arab Emirates has links to the Rapid Support Forces, as well as some other regional players. He also said that perhaps, although on the ground you certainly don't hear any indication that there's a willingness to talk about a ceasefire, perhaps some of the conditions that exist now would help, such as looming famine, and also that it did not look as if either side was in the position to win a military victory. But he did acknowledge that, you know, that there weren't necessarily huge chances of this succeeding.
Barbara Plett Usher talking to us live there from Nairobi. Thank you very much indeed. She mentioned the American Special Envoy, Tom Perriello. We have an interview with him coming up on Monday. Monday will mark a year since the conflict broke out in Sudan, and our Newsday programme on Monday will be focusing heavily on the conflict, the impact on civilians, and what could be done to end it.
Now, on the show, we've been covering how kidnapping for ransom in Nigeria has flared up again, with several mass abductions in March, while the country's largest mass kidnapping occurred almost 10 years ago in 2014, when the militant Islamic group Boko Haram seized more than 270 schoolgirls from the dormitory in the town of Chibok in northeast Nigeria. 10 years later, more than 80 girls are still missing, and the ongoing threat posed by a violent group continues to harm the livelihoods of many in the town. The BBC's Azizat Ulaulua visited Chibok and has this report.
Our team is on the road towards Chibok, and we have left from Yola in the early hours. We've already passed 8 military checkpoints manned by heavily armed soldiers of the Nigerian army. The security threats in this part of the country are still very real, and incidents along the road, as well as beyond, are unfortunately still very common. After more than 5 hours on the road, we finally arrive in Chibok town and head straight to Esther Yakubu's house. She is sitting on a mat inside her compound on a sunny Sunday afternoon. In her thin hand, she is tightly holding on to 2 photographs with fading images. It shows her missing daughter, Dorcas.
I still look at her pictures. Sometimes people will say, you have other kids, but when I'm alone, it's never easy. I know that God is with her.
The pictures are the only possessions she has kept of Dorcas, who was one of the 276 schoolgirls kidnapped in the town a decade ago. While many have returned home or managed to flee, Dorcas and over 80 other girls are still missing.
I'm trusting in God. I'm also having hope that one day I will see her.
The boarding school where the abductions took place is just a short 5 minutes drive from Esther's house. The cream-colored painted low-rise buildings were rebuilt, while some other structures look abandoned. The school reopened in 2021, and the new principal, Mohammed Shiroma, is keen to welcome more students.
As you can see, this school, almost every part of the school, within and outside, are surrounded by military. And we have a very tight security that it is only those who are outside. But those of us, as you come in here, you just feel as if you're at home.
From the school, it's a short walk through streets that are almost deserted to Chibok's central market, which is more busy and lively. 10 years after the town shot to global fame, some residents like Hassan Usman, a trader, tell me insecurity is still affecting every part of their lives.
The security in Chibok here has affected our business seriously, especially like my own, that I'm into building materials, because nobody is willing to come and build his house or renovate his house again.
Manasseh Allen was born and raised in Chibok. He moved to the federal capital, Abuja, after he lost his business to Boko Haram. He believes little has changed in the town.
Governance generally is at its lowest around here. So social amenities and other things are lacking. So the town is actually not showing anything that is different from what it used to be.
Senator Ali Ndume is the national lawmaker in Abuja, representing the district where Chibok is located.
The government did not forget about this issue of Chibok girls. They are looking out to it. And most of the leadership of the Nigerian army, particularly now, the chief of army staff, the chief of defense staff, the chief of air force, were all part of the, at one time served in the theater. And the priority there is recovery of not only the Chibok girls, but other kidnapped victims.
For 10 years, Esther and the other parents of the over 80 girls still missing have been longing to see their daughters again. Despite the many years past, their hope has not faded.
That's a report by Azizat Ula Uluwa, who now joins us from Nigeria. Azizat, when you went there, and this is quite painful to see that even now, after 10 years, more than 80 girls are missing. What's being done to get them back?
That's the sad reality. There is no official statement from authorities, who took over power last year, that they are doing anything to recover the remaining Chibok schoolgirls that are still in captivity. Of course, you know that this present administration has been overwhelmed by multiple number of mass kidnappings. Just last month, we recorded 6 of such incidents, meaning that the security architecture and the government may have too much on their plate at the moment, and the rescue of the remaining girls may not be priority, unfortunately.
Azizat, I've got a message from one of our listeners saying the ease with which gunmen in Nigeria abduct school children and civilians in general sometimes make me ask if there's an entity in the country that fulfills the definition of a government. This is Ikayo Wilson from Uganda who's asking this. And there surely must be anger against the government also for not being able to do much. It seems that Chibok marked a turning point, the way in which the Nigerian government deals with these kidnappings.
Absolutely, really. You know, the lawmaker I spoke to, Alion Jume, said the same thing as well. Because if you recall, the last administration headed by former President Muhammadu Buhari, he was able to initiate 2 negotiations that saw the release of more than 100 Chibok schoolgirls during his administration. And the lawmaker said that, and there were reports at the time accusing the government of actually paying ransom to Boko Haram, but the government denied it, and later on said that for the second one, they only engaged in prisoner swap, you know, releasing some Boko Haram, suspected Boko Haram commanders and getting the girls back. So the lawmaker said that of the incident of allegedly paying ransom to militants, kind of inspired not just Boko Haram fighters, but other criminal-minded people across the country now to realize that, oh, you can actually pick people up, and then you get paid for it. And how do you get the attention of authorities that have the big money? Go and target schools, target school children, and then the government, who is responsible for their safety, will be forced to come to the negotiation table. And here we are today.
Aziza, thank you for joining us, and you can hear more of that powerful documentary on BBC Sounds. Meanwhile, as Aziza pointed out in her report, that schools are now turning into fortresses with extra security being deployed, especially in Chibok, where there are concerns of kidnapping still remain.
Tuesday Newsday on the BBC World Service with Davina James and Isaac with the sports.
Nightmare evening if you're a Liverpool fan, or in the Europa League quarter-final, as they were beaten 3-0 by Italian side Atalanta at Anfield. Former Liverpool defender Stephen Warnock described it as the worst he's ever seen Liverpool play under Jurgen Klopp. Elsewhere, Bayer Leverkusen beat West Ham United 2-0 at home to continue their impressive unbeaten season. A bit later on in the programme, we're going to be hearing from Czech Kane Sarr. He is the Senegalese footballer who is playing in the third tier of Spanish football. He was racially abused a few weeks ago by a person in the crowd at the match, and he was given a red card for jumping into the stand to confront the person, and then banned for 2 games by the Spanish Football Federation. We're going to hear his reaction to that. And in golf, Bryson DeChambeau leads by 1 from Scotty Scheffler after a storm-shortened first day at the Masters, the first golf major of the year. The 2020 US Open champ finished 7.
Best of stuff, Isaac. Thank you.
Well, Isaac, you used the word nightmare, so I'm going to just take it for a business story as well. Suransha Tiwari joining us from Singapore. What a nightmare then for a pharma company like Moderna, which has invested so much in making a vaccine during the COVID, Suransha, and now they're pausing the plan to build a manufacturing facility for it in Kenya. Tell us more.
That's right, and Moderna is citing the post-pandemic decline in demand for COVID-19 vaccines, and it's also in line with its strategy, it says, of resizing its manufacturing network to cut costs. But it is spending around $4.5 billion this year in research and development of other new vaccines, including for cancer. Now, it had plans to start filling doses of its COVID vaccine in the continent as early as 2023, but Moderna says it's not received any vaccine orders for Africa since 2022 amid waning demand globally. Lots of AIDS organizations in Africa saying it's a big problem because those vaccines are needed.
And it seems then vaccines as a business remains risky for pharma companies.
Not risky so much. I think it doesn't make that much money for these pharmaceutical companies. That's certainly what they told us through the COVID pandemic. What they said was a vaccine, and Moderna made the new technology, the mRNA, the messenger RNA vaccines. Once you create the technology and you make the vaccine, people only really need 1 or 2 doses in a year, so they don't make as much money. There's much more profitability in things like cancer treatments, which people have to keep coming back for, and also creating new technologies for vaccines. Moderna also looking at vaccines for other diseases like HIV and malaria.
Absolutely essential to get vaccines, and then the risk that comes with it for the pharma companies, though, once the pandemic has passed. We can see Moderna. Thanks, Suransha Tiwari, for joining us from Singapore.
Now, Israel is on high alert after Iran vowed to take vengeance for the killing of a number of its senior commanders at its main consulate in the Syrian capital Damascus at the beginning of the month, an attack it blames on Israel. The US has warned that Iran may launch a significant attack. An American general is in Israel to discuss the threat, whether that's a direct one or otherwise. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel was ready for all scenarios, adding, "Whoever hurts us, we hurt them." We can speak now to our Middle East correspondent, Hugo Bashega. Hello to you. Tell us then about what seems to be a Western wave of diplomacy trying to convince Iran not to strike back.
Yeah, James, this is very interesting because this is coming after days of warnings from the Americans saying that this Iranian retaliation is a matter of when, not if. And I think the most dramatic warning came a day ago from President Biden, who said that the Iranians were planning a significant attack. And he said that if there was an attack from Iran on Israel, the Americans would respond. So warnings and even threats from the Americans, from the Israelis as well. The Israeli defense minister, the Israeli prime minister have vowed to retaliate if there is any kind of Iranian attack. But there has been a lot of diplomatic effort as well. Phone calls. We had, the foreign ministers of Germany, the UK, Australia, talking to the Iranian foreign minister, essentially to say, look, you've got to de-escalate the situation. And we had a tweet from the Iranian foreign minister after those conversations saying that, well, we don't want to, increase hostilities in the region. So obviously the fear here is that if there is an Iranian attack, and I think the concern is that this attack could, target, Israeli territory. This could lead to an Israeli response, and then this could trigger a wider conflict in the region. So lots of warnings, but also a lot of diplomatic activity to try to persuade Iran, from, not going ahead with this attack.
Presumably, the Iranians could argue that had it been, say, an American diplomatic building attacked and lots of American generals killed, America would certainly be responding.
Yeah, and the Iranians are also saying that there hasn't been any kind of international condemnation following that attack. They said, well, look, our diplomatic compound was hit by another country, and there hasn't been any kind of international reaction to that. So they're trying to make that point. I mean, the thing here is that this was humiliating for Iran. It was, their embassy or diplomatic compound in Damascus that was hit. Several military advisors were killed, including, a top Iranian general. So it was a massive attack, humiliating for the Iranians, and they need to be seen as giving a response. So we've seen, the supreme leader saying that, the Iranians are going to retaliate. So I think what the Americans are saying is that the Iranians are planning to do something themselves instead of using one of their proxies in the region. We know that Hezbollah, in Lebanon, has been attacking Israel almost every day. So I think the concern here is that the Iranians are planning to do it and not planning to use one of their proxies to carry out this attack.
And we've been using the word escalation a lot. That's, of course, because of the conflict in Gaza. What is the latest on Gaza?
Yeah, so there have been some Israeli attacks, but I think, the focus now is on those attempts to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. We're still waiting to hear from Hamas. I think there were some reports yesterday here in Israel that this response could come today. We know that it is incredibly difficult for Hamas officials to get in touch with the Hamas leader in Gaza, who is expected to give the final word on that proposal. But again, at the heart of this proposal is a 6-week ceasefire that could lead to the release of hostages.
Hugo Bashega, our Middle East correspondent, thank you very much indeed. You're listening to Newsday on the BBC World Service.
Distribution of the BBC World Service in the U.S. is made possible by American Public Media, producer and distributor of award-winning public radio content. APM, American Public Media, with support from Betterment, the automated investing platform that helps make it easy to be invested for the long term. Learn more at betterment.com. Investing involves risk.
Neighbors helping neighbors.
The volunteering in Ukraine has become a part of our everyday life.
Feasts with new friends.
Hot peppers, tomatoes, garlic, and they're grinding all of that into a pulp.
All around the world.
NPR News in Guerrero State, Mexico.
Beirut.
St. Petersburg.
Balmoldo, Germany.
Mumbai.
Lagos.
We'll take you there on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Weekdays beginning at 3 p.m. on News 88.7.
Hello and welcome to Newsday from the BBC World Service with Davina Gupta and James Copnall.
Coming up, Russian military instructors and an air defense system are deployed in Niger. We'll look at what it means.
Authorities in Togo ban opposition parties protesting against proposed changes to the country's constitution. We tell you why.
And we'll hear about the Senegalese footballer, hear from the Senegalese footballer who suffered racist abuse in Spain.
BBC News with David Harper. The international aid agency Médecins Sans Frontières says levels of malnutrition in Sudan are much worse than feared. It found that a child is dying every 2 hours in one displaced camp in the Darfur region. Argentina's second highest court has held Iran responsible for 2 attacks in Buenos Aires in the 1990s, suicide bombings at the Israeli embassy and a Jewish center where more than 85 people were killed. The Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has told his US counterpart that Israel will respond appropriately if it is directly attacked by Iran. Washington continues to try to dissuade Iran from launching a retaliatory strike following the attack on its consulate in Syria last week. President Biden has said the United States is ready to defend Manila from any attack in the South China Sea as he hosted a summit with the leaders of Japan and the Philippines. There have been repeated confrontations between Chinese and Philippine vessels off disputed islands. The head of China's rubber stamp parliament is in Pyongyang to meet his North Korean counterpart. The talks between Zhao Zhili, China's third highest-ranking official, and North Korea's Choi Ryong-hae will focus on promoting cooperation. The Ukrainian military says there's been more Russian airstrikes against its energy infrastructure. An unspecified facility in the Dnipropetrovsk region is ablaze after it was hit by what the authorities described as drone debris. The Russian authorities have expressed concern that the Kurgan region in western Siberia could be flooded in the coming days. The village of Kaminska is being evacuated after the water level on the Tobol River rose 1.4 meters overnight. The American football star Rashee Rice has turned himself in to authorities after a warrant was issued for his arrest in connection with a high-speed car crash in Dallas, Texas last month. The Super Bowl winning receiver is facing 8 felony charges. BBC News.
Thank you for that news. Welcome back on Newsday. You're with James Copnall and Davina Gupta. In this half hour, we're going to talk about Russia's military trainers in Niger, politics of Togo, abortion debate in Arizona, and how's the U.S. trying to counter China's aggression in the South China Sea. For all these stories, you can WhatsApp us, you can text us. Our number is +44 77 86 20 50 85.
State television in Niger has announced the deployment of Russian military instructors in the country. It also said Russia had agreed to install an anti-aircraft system. Niger has been run by a military government since last year's coup d'etat and has made no secret that it wants stronger cooperation with Moscow. And it comes after the military junta publicly tore up its military agreement with the US, which had allowed the Americans to operate bases in the country. We can head now to neighbouring Mali to speak to Ulf Lessing from the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Foundation, which promotes democracy. Ulf looks particularly into the Sahel region. Welcome back to the programme. So, what exactly is happening here?
Yeah, Russia has been trying to win over Niger. They're already active with mercenaries in Mali and neighboring Burkina Faso, and also signed a military cooperation agreement with Niger after a coup, ousted the elected president in July, who had been close to the West.
Okay, and do you think that the Russian presence will make a significant military difference as the country attempts to fight jihadists?
Well, the thing, it's a bit funny. Jihadists, you don't need anti-aircraft, batteries. So that looks to me more like the regime survival package. That the military government is still concerned that the Western African bloc, ECOWAS, might try to do a military intervention to oust them. So that seems to be the reason why they're bringing in anti-aircraft batteries. Otherwise, I don't have any explanations, because jihadists, they don't have planes.
Yeah. Does the military junta need to show the people that it is getting something in return for turning to Russia and kicking out the Americans?
Yeah, I guess so. They basically ended the relationship not just with the Americans, also with all Western powers. They kicked out French forces, ended, European Union training missions. So I guess they want to showcase that the country is not heading into isolation, but they're actually doing something with Russia instead.
And do you have a sense of where public opinion stands on the direction taken by the junta?
Yeah, it's difficult to gauge. Russia is not really a natural partner for Niger. There's not even a Russian embassy in the capital Niamey. France is extremely unpopular, so that's probably the game the government is playing. Look, France is gone, now we bring the new partner who's supposedly anti-colonial. But at the end of the day, very few people know much about Russia and Niger.
Yeah. And how does this tie into a broader move towards Russia in that part of the Sahel?
Yeah, Russia has been making fast progress in the region. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, also Central African Republic, are countries now close to Russia. They're exploiting strong anti-French, sentiment. For them, it's basically, for Russia, it's a geopolitical game. They see the Sahel as a new Cold War to undermine Europe and the West, and making unfortunately much progress there.
And so this then becomes, I suppose, an important part of Russia's strategy in the region. Is West Africa, the Sahel, significant when Russia considers globally its diplomacy, though?
Well, it's another region, where Russia is making progress. The Sahel is extremely important for Europe because it's like Niger is the main transit route for migrants coming from Southern Africa to North Africa, Libya, and then on by boat to Italy. So if you kind of have influence in Niger, you basically can technically, send more migrants to Europe, and which then boosts right-wing parties. So that's all adds to the Russian playbook to undermine Europe and the West.
Ulf Lessing, thank you very much indeed, from the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Foundation, promoting democracy. He was speaking in Bamako.
Now let's go to Togo, where the authorities have banned 3 days of opposition protests against proposed changes to the country's constitution ahead of the legislative elections at the end of this month. The French Foreign Ministry has also issued an alert to its citizens in Togo over possible unrest earlier this week. Opposition activities are restricted in the West African nation that has been governed by the same family for more than 4 decades. We're now joined by Nicholas Negos of the BBC. Thanks so much for being with us this morning. You're joining us from Senegal, but you've been covering events in Togo this week. Can you give a brief overview about what is it all about? What are these protests about?
Well, Victoria, what's happening in Togo is in fact linked to the change of the constitution. It's been a very turbulent week so far, and it might get worse. Togo's opposition has called the recent constitutional changes approved by lawmakers intended to weaken the power of the president and attempt to show up what they call the dictatorship of President Faure Gnassingbe. The opposition urged the population to take off the streets and protest against the change of the constitution today and over the weekend. But the authorities have banned the demonstrations, so it's not clear if they will take place or not. In fact, the divide in Togolese politics is so stark that nothing the government does is trusted by its opponents.
And what is this change in the constitution going to lead to if it happens?
So, in fact, the country's new constitution grants parliament the power to choose the president, doing away with direct elections. So Togo could become a parliamentary regime instead of a presidential regime. This makes it likely that you were speaking about a dynasty, that Faure Gnassingbé could be easily re-elected when his fourth mandate expires in 2025 next year. Let me explain to you in 4 points what is the new constitution about. So firstly, first, the President of the Republic is elected for a single mandate of 6 years by the National Assembly and the Senate. And under the new system, Togo's existing presidency will be reduced to a ceremonial role only. Number two, the President of the Council of Ministers is appointed for terms of 6 years, and he's the one who will be leading the party or the leader of the coalition of parties in the majority at the end of the legislative elections. The legislative elections were due to take place on the 20th this month, but they've been postponed to the 29th. Number three, the MPs for their part are elected by the population for a renewable mandate of 6 years, so not a big change. And number four, the term of office of senators is also 6 years renewable.
Yes,
so
and the fact that this proposal has also been submitted for public consultations, do you see this rallying behind what many are calling a demand for don't touch my constitution?
Well, it's really tricky because even if the authorities are trying to do as if they want to consult the population, tensions are rising, Victoria, in this West African nation, as public anger over the constitution bill mounted with police breaking up an opposition news conference at the end of March and cracking down on protests. So the coming days are really uncertain. As a few legal expert that I spoke to yesterday told me that a referendum was necessary for the country to adopt a new constitution.
Thank you, Nicholas Negos, for joining us. Davina here. I'll catch up with you after the show. Thanks.
Newsday on the BBC World Service with Davina and James. Let me give you a couple of our main headlines. Levels of malnutrition in Sudan are much worse than feared, with a child dying every 2 hours in one camp for the displaced in the western Darfur region because of the civil war in the country. We'll have full coverage of the year's anniversary of the Sudan civil war on Monday on Newsday. And a court in Argentina has ruled that Tehran ordered 2 attacks on Israeli and Jewish targets in Buenos Aires in the 1990s and declared Iran a terrorist state.
To the South China Sea now, in the Western Pacific Ocean, where a group of islands has been part of a dispute between China and Japan and the Philippines. The U.S. now has voiced serious concerns over China's growing aggression there. In fact, U.S. President Joe Biden has pledged to defend the Philippines from any attack, and his comments came at an historic summit where the U.S. is hosting President Marcos of the Philippines and Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. And earlier I was joined from Washington by Richard Hedadian, who is a Filipino analyst, and this is the first time he said these leaders of 3 countries are meeting together. And I started off by asking him why the South China Sea has been such a point of contention between China and the Philippines.
Without a question, the South China Sea is where the parameters of U.S.-China competition are most stark and potentially explosive. Now, the problem is that, of course, China is trying to press its advantage and impose its will against smaller countries like the Philippines. And the reason why the United States is part of this picture is precisely because the Philippines is a U.S. treaty ally. And much of the troubling action and tussle in recent months has been over the so-called Second Thomas Shoal. It's a It's a small low tide elevation within the Philippines exclusive economic zone, which China also claims as part of its 9-dash line. Now, the Philippines resupplies its marines who have been marooned over a grounded warship, PRP Sierra Madre, which has been grounded over the shoal since 1999 for the Philippines to exert and exercise its sovereign claims over the contested shoal. So in the past 6 months alone, there have been multiple incidents when China used water cannons, almost lethal water cannons, to prevent the Philippines from resupplying its marines and troops in the area. And that has raised concerns about potential escalation into an all-out armed conflict that could also draw in the Americans.
The disputes in the South China Sea have been going on for some time. Why do you think it's escalated now?
Obviously, these disputes have been going on for a long time, but it's only in the past 10 years that China has tried to operationalize it through massive building of artificial islands, through militarizing those islands, to deploying an armada of militia forces across the area. Now, in the case of the Philippines, interestingly, under the former President Rodrigo Duterte, the Philippines took a softer stance on the disputes because President Duterte had a lot of beef with the Americans. He felt the Philippines was too dependent on the Americans. He wanted to get more development aid from China. Throughout that period, the Philippines really didn't assert its claims in the area and tried to find an accommodation with China. And in fact, there were some incidents also during Duterte time, but as much as possible, he personally tried to downplay them. But now under President Marcos Jr., the Philippines is taking a different stance. It is asserting its claims in defiance of China, and it seems that China cannot accept this because they were expecting that Marcos Jr., of course, that's a quite notorious name, they were expecting that Marcos Jr. will broadly continue the more subservient approach that Duterte adopted throughout his 6 years in office from 2016 to 2022. But over the past year, Marcos Jr. has progressively stepped up the Philippines' claims in the area, Philippines patrols in the area, and also, more importantly, is allowing more and more American military presence in its northern provinces next to Taiwan.
And at this summit in Washington, Japan was also there. Philippines was there. It's first of its kind, signifying the U.S. and Japan support in South China, in the South China Sea with Philippines. Now, how much of this makes a difference?
Well, the United States is moving on multiple fronts. I think there's a belief in Washington and many capitals in the region that multilateral organizations like the ASEAN, Association of South Asian Nations, are not stepping up to the plate. But more importantly, Japan and the Philippines are the immediate neighbors of Taiwan. So the Biden administration is trying to bring in those two countries and trilaterally prepare for any contingencies over Taiwan. I think there's this sense in the Philippines that it has to gain China's grudging respect by standing up to China until a new equilibrium of bilateral relations emerges.
How do you see it playing out now?
Definitely, we're going to have very tense months ahead. And I think the devil is also in the details. One of the things that China is watching is whether the Philippines is going to be more and more directly involved on the Taiwan question. Because the fear of China is that the Philippines will not only help expand American military presence in the South China Sea, but potentially bring in more American and Japanese military presence close to Taiwan. So it's very likely that China's aggressive actions against the Philippines is a form of signaling and warning the Philippines from not getting too much into America's strategic embrace.
That was Richard Hedarian, a political analyst from the Philippines, joining me from the US.
Let's turn now to our sports presenter, Isaac Fannin.
Sheikh Kane Sarr has been playing in Spanish football for a few years now. He was born in Senegal and plays for the third-tier club side, Real Majadahonda. A few weeks ago, he was playing in a match against a team called Sestao and was the victim of racial abuse. However, he was punished for his reaction to that abuse. I spoke to him and asked him what had happened. You might find some of Cheikh's descriptions of what happened to him hard to hear.
Last Saturday, we were playing in Bilbao against Sestao. In the second half, I heard some monkey noises coming from inside the stadium. In the 83rd minute, a fan, an ultra in the stands, came down when we scored the second goal. I went to break my fast because I'm Muslim near the side of the pitch towards the corner flag. He came down and started insulting me. He was saying all sorts of things like, "You black monkey," a guy. So I just jumped into the stands to go and find him. I didn't want anything violent. I just wanted to find him because I wanted the video to go around. I wanted it to be viral on social media so people could see what is happening. and could see the face of the one who has been insulting me.
And how did it make you feel at the time?
I was angry and I was very sad as well. Because as a player who comes to Europe to play, who tries to feed his family back in Africa, it's just very hurtful. If I was a youngster, a child at best, maybe I could understand. But here was an old man throwing insults. It really hurt. That is why I reacted the way I did. I wanted to show his face. I wanted people to be able to see him so that he could be identified, because it really hurt me. And that's why I reacted like that. I didn't want to be aggressive or violent. That was not my intention. I just wanted people to see how people can insult us on the ground.
I want to ask about things that have happened since that game. You were given a 2-match ban. Do you know why?
Yes, indeed, I got a 2-match ban and a €600 fine as well. This 2-match ban was for jumping across the barrier to go and find this guy, and it is that gesture that has been sanctioned by the league because they thought it was inappropriate. And my team was fined €3,000 as well.
Do you think that that's fair?
To fight against racism, to get rid of racism in football and in the world, I think football should be something that unites people. We should be a family. So if someone is a victim of racism, I think, no, it is not fair. I know I shouldn't have jumped in the stands. I didn't know I was going to be fined when I jumped. I didn't think about that. But if someone is the victim of racism, they should not be sanctioned. We should protect the player. In order to stop racism, we should sanction the person who is being racist, the one who is being insulted. That person is the victim and should be protected because he is the one who has been insulted. He is the one who is a victim. So to be frank, no, I don't think it's fair.
Do you think that if you were playing in a higher league, if you were Vinicius Jr. and the same thing Vinicius Jr. did what you did, do you think they would have sanctioned him as they have with you?
To be honest with you, I'm only giving you my opinion. But I know we're not Vinicius. We don't play in a higher league, but I think that all players should be treated equally. Yes, they're better known, but the penalties should be the same. If I was playing for Real Madrid, I don't think I would have been punished. But what I'm really glad about is that everyone supported me, Vinicius. And I would like to thank him because he is doing incredible work regarding racism in Spain. So for that, I want to thank him for the work he's doing.
Do you think they care about dealing with racism in Spain?
No, I don't think so. If you're ready to fight sufficiently against racism, the victim who has suffered racism, you have to protect him and not punish him. If you sanction him, you're not defending the cause. You have to protect him. You need to give him power. And you have to punish the other team or the person in the stand throwing racist abuse. That's how you fight racism. Not just in soccer, but in the world in general.
If what happened to you last week were to happen again, what would you do? Would you do the same thing?
No, I pray to God it doesn't happen again. I cannot cope with it. I have learned a lot from this, but I don't know how I will cope with it again. I'm obviously not going to jump in the stands again, but I will stop playing if it happens again. I will leave the pitch because racism is not acceptable.
Yeah, that was Czech Kane Sar there. Really difficult hearing his story, but he told it with such grace and just bravery. And so, yeah, just wish him the best of luck going forward. But, yeah, really interesting hearing his story.
As a fan, thank you. Newsday on the BBC World Service, 53 minutes past the hour. Well, earlier this week on the programme, we heard about the Supreme Court in Arizona in the US ruling that a 160-year-old abortion ban can be enforced in the state. It means Arizona joins more than a dozen other states where abortion has been largely outlawed since the federal right such a service was removed by the US Supreme Court 2 years ago. A minimum 2-week reprieve is currently in place in Arizona as the legal parameters are worked out. It is, of course, a contentious issue, which, as well as having a significant potential health impact statewide, is also fueling political debate now and in the months ahead as the US presidential elections in November loom. With that in mind, the US Vice President Kamala Harris is set to visit Arizona today for an event focused on reproductive freedom. She has, in recent times, been railing against national Republican-led attempts to restrict abortion.
And in Arizona's legislature on Thursday, a heated exchange was heard on the floor as cries of shame echoed out, with senior Republicans blocking attempts to repeal the 1864 abortion ban. For more on all of this, I spoke earlier to abortion advocate Yasmin Ansari, who is currently seeking candidacy as a Democrat to the U.S. House of Representatives for Arizona's 3rd Congressional District. She's also a former vice mayor of Phoenix City in Arizona.
This week was a gut-wrenching week for women in Arizona. There was a decision by the Arizona Supreme Court to enforce a total abortion ban dating back to 1864. This has had huge implications both within our state and nationally, as in about 2 weeks, the law will be enforced and women and pregnant people will not be able to get an abortion at all in the state. There are very few exceptions, and it's a very devastating decision. This last week, in the immediate aftermath, our state legislature has been looking at this decision, and of course we're seeing a lot of flip-flopping from Republican extremists in the legislature who have previously been very supportive of abortion bans and now are quite fearful of their election prospects in the state. And so there was chaos in our state legislature as conversations eroded around potentially repealing that 1864 ban, but then there was a break in the session, and you saw Democrats chanting in the House and demanding to repeal this, but we are nowhere close to that. So it's been very chaotic, very devastating for women, and we're definitely seeing the implications here on the ground.
How are politics around this issue then being shaped? Because on one hand, you have former President Donald Trump, who has said that Arizona has gone too far, and he has said with this entire law, and he said that it will be straightened out, is what he has said. And on the other hand, you have in the state legislature Republicans disrupting the proceedings, supporting it.
I don't believe a word Donald Trump says on this. He has made very clear that he is not supportive of women and bodily autonomy, and has relentlessly attacked our freedoms. The extremist judges that he appointed to the Supreme Court are the reason we're in this position today. They are the ones who overturned Roe v. Wade, which was the law of the land in this country for decades, and sent it back to the states. He is absolutely, it doesn't matter what he says. You're seeing Republicans across the board change their tune on this issue because they are terrified of their election prospects come November.
How are people seeing this in Arizona?
So I'm running for Congress right now in Arizona, and I'm knocking on doors every day, and I can tell you that in the last few days as I've been knocking doors, this is the #1 issue that people are talking about. It doesn't matter where you live in Phoenix. It doesn't matter, frankly, if you're a Democrat, independent, many Republicans, especially women. I can see why the Republican state legislators are flip-flopping on the issue, especially those in very close races and close districts. I do not think it's going to be a toothless law, because the fear that is going to exist regardless within our medical community, that is real. It doesn't, as much as an attorney general or as much as, these highly respected leaders in our state will say we will not prosecute, how much assurance is that in a political system that is so fluid and that is impacted by elections every couple of years? I have talked to healthcare providers on the ground here, and, even Planned Parenthood has said we will be providing services until this goes into effect, and then there will be a pause. So what it's going to do is it's going to impact services, and women are going to be impacted by this. You may also know that there is an initiative right now to get abortion on the ballot in November in Arizona. There's a campaign to basically enshrine the right to a constitution, right to an abortion in our Constitution. The campaign's collected well over 500,000 signatures to qualify for the ballot, and they're continuing to collect. And I'm very very confident that if this makes it to the ballot in November, Arizonans will overwhelmingly vote to protect abortion access.
That was Yasmin Ansari, abortion advocate, currently seeking candidacy as a Democrat to the House of Representatives in the U.S. You've been listening to Newsday with James Copnell and Davina Gupta. Thank you for being with us.
Bye-bye.
Houston Public Media is a service of the University of Houston and is supported with your gifts to the Houston Public Media Foundation. More information available online at houstonpublicmedia.org/donate.
Neighbors helping neighbors.
The volunteering in Ukraine has become a part of our everyday life.
Feasts with new friends.
Hot peppers, tomatoes, garlic, and they're grinding all of that into a pulp.
Okay. Ini aja. Oh. Halo Bro Ahmad Sandi, terima kasih udah impang ke channel ini ya.
Left turn ahead. Take the next left.
Ya. Semangat terus live-nya Bang, semoga bisa jadi besar channelnya, amin. Makasih untuk doanya Bro Ahmad juga, semoga dilancarkan rezekinya.
Use the right lane to stay on the current road, then turn right.
Semoga dilancarkan rezekinya, segala urusannya ya Bro Ahmad, amin. Orang udah masuk masih ada ngonyong.
Recalculating.
Bercut. Istirahat dulu. Cari pengiriman. Heading. Pernah Santa Cruz. Pernah Eureka. Kok pernah. Houston udah pernah. Nogales udah pernah. Clifton Barco pernah. Oh ini ya. Diantar jam. Ke sini. Dari sini dulu. Era. Nah, ini dia. Ada yang dekat, bro. Aduh. Oke. Nah. Ini. Aduh. Bisa travel gitu. Oke, para viewers, sepertinya saya mau jemput dulu istri ya sebentar. Lanjut lagi. AFK dulu sebentar ya. Jemput dulu istri dulu. Alhamdulillah sudah bro. Ini mau jemput dulu sebentar, nanti setelah jemput deket kok jemputnya. Nanti balik lagi ya. itu. Bro itu. Mau pulang Salim. Katanya Salim. Pulang nggak? Ayo.
Apa teh?
Jalan. Enggak, mau di sini aja.
Kata apa?
Ya wes. Oh ya udah. Maksudnya kan biar saya nggak bolak-balik.
Iya. Tadi Salim sama bapak apa?
Salim. Itu pertama mah. Astagfirullah. Astagfirullah. Ketawa ayo.
Nggak ngabarin ke Parung Salam, jawab papa bilang dia udah di Parung Salam. Ya semua ada bapak. Coba bapak ke naik mobil apa pasti mau pulang.
Biar cepat ya. Ke situnya kan. Bro balik bang, udah bro, udah balik. Kirim barang. Makasih tadi. Jam-jam gitu apa nggak capek? Ya lumayan kan karena ini aja lagi gabut aja, jadi bisa sampai berjam-jam. Paling main Dota, kalau bosen Dota main ini truk-trukan. Aja nggak ini juga sambil istirahat live nya juga.
It's definitely not, and it was really during my tenure as a professor just a few years ago that I started doing that, and it was definitely because of my students, right? Oftentimes we educate in the ways we were educated, and over the past few years I've been learning from my students about how they want to be educated and the type of environment they would like to learn in, and so a bunch of my students were always suggesting we should do this choreography, we should do this dance, and I've embraced it since.
So Basically putting some fun back into the science.
Yes. Bring fun into science.
Who would have thought? I mean, it's groundbreaking. Oh, thank you so much, Professor Andre Isaacs. Now, listen, talking of work, we haven't actually talked about your work at all. We talked about TikTok videos. So, if it's all right with you, we're going to come back to you in the second half of the show and talk a bit about the actual chemistry. How do you feel about that?
Let's do it.
So, after a bit of a song and dance, and inspired by Beyonce's new album, we've discovered that early cowboys were black or Mexican, that the iconic instrument of bluegrass, the banjo, was originally an African instrument cased on a gourd, and Professor Andre Isaacs just shared why he thinks chemistry deserves a bit of the old razzle-dazzle. Well, don't we all? A month ago, I was reading this study that said that dancing is even more effective than medication at treating depression. So whatever gets your toes tapping is worth a listen. Still to come on the show, chemistry that's a bit like Legos. We explore whether the Earth is shrinking, there'll be insights into why some hair is curly, and I'll be telling the story of how an eclipse just over 100 years ago helped overturn a world of physics, putting Einstein's theory of relativity on its throne. That's all coming up shortly.
Distribution of the BBC World Service in the United States is made possible by American Public Media, producer and distributor of award-winning public radio content, with support from C3 Generative AI, verified, traceable answers, secure, hallucination-free, LLM agnostic, IP liability-free. Learn more at c3.ai.
Support for Public Radio Tulsa is provided by the Tulsa County Bar Association Lawyer Referral Service, providing connections for people with legal questions. Information about using this service is available at tulsabar.com or at 918-587-6014.
Public Radio 89.5 KWGS HD1 Tulsa. National Public Radio, Northeastern Oklahoma.
Coming up after the news, chemistry that's a bit like Lego. We explore whether the Earth is shrinking. We have insights into why some hair is curly, and I'll be telling the story of how an eclipse just over 100 years ago helped overturn a world of physics, putting Einstein's theory of general relativity in its throne. That plus other unexpected elements coming up shortly.
BBC News with Moira Alderson. Levels of malnutrition in Sudan are much worse than feared. Médecins Sans Frontières has found that in one displacement camp in Darfur, at least one child is dying every 2 hours. A court in Argentina has deemed Iran responsible for 2 attacks in Buenos Aires in the 1990s, suicide bombings at the Israeli embassy and a Jewish center where more than 85 people were killed. Israel's defense minister has told his US counterpart that his country will respond appropriately if it's directly attacked by Iran. Washington is still trying to dissuade Tehran from retaliating for Israel's attack on its Damascus consulate. The British Navy says lasers designed to shoot down drones will be deployed on warships 5 years earlier than scheduled. The introduction of the Dragonfire system will begin in 2027. The Chinese delegation is in North Korea for the highest level meeting in 5 years between the two traditional allies. Beijing is thought to be concerned at the instability caused by Pyongyang's regular missile tests. Ukraine says there have been more Russian airstrikes against its energy infrastructure. An unspecified facility in the Dnipropetrovsk region is ablaze. The authorities said it was hit by drone debris. The Russian authorities say they're worried that the Kurgan region in western Siberia could be flooded in the coming days. One village is being evacuated after waters of the Tobol River rose 1.4 meters overnight. A court in Peru has given sentences of more than 28 years each to 5 men who were being tried for the murders of indigenous activists. And an American football star, Rashee Rice, has turned himself into the authorities after a warrant was issued for his arrest in connection with a high-speed car crash in Texas last month. He's facing 8 felony charges. That's the latest. BBC News.
Turn right.
This is Unexpected Elements from the BBC World Service. I'm Marnie Chesterton in Wales in the UK, and with me in voice are our global panel of journalists. In India we have
Chavi Sachdev,
and in Mexico we have
Christina.
And still with us, we also have Andre. Andre, if you'd like to remind listeners what you do.
Hi, I'm Andre Isaacs. I'm an associate professor of chemistry at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts.
And we'll be hearing about Andre's adventures in click chemistry in a moment. But first, every week, Chavi, Christine and I sort through a lot of stories looking for places where the science shines through. We call this section Under the Radar. Chavi, you're starting us off. What's been going on in your world that you think should be getting more attention?
A story of a quiet little rebellion. Okay, maybe that's a little more sensationalist than actual truth, but see what you think. Well, first, what do you know about how species are named?
I know a bit about how some of them have slightly silly names, so gorilla is the official name for a gorilla. Oh, there's Latin involved as well.
Absolutely, full points to you then. Yes, there are rules in taxonomy, which is the finding, describing, and naming of the species of living or fossil organisms. We use what's called a binomial nomenclature, which means there are two parts to the name. So think of Homo sapiens or Tyrannosaurus rex. The first part of the name, the generic name, usually Latin, identifies the genus to which the species belongs. But the second part is the species within the genus. And the system started back in 1622 with Gaspard Bosan, and it was formalized in 1753 by Carl Linnaeus in his book Species Plantarum. By the way, should you find an undiscovered species, either of you, it's considered bad taste to name it after yourself, and it's one of the rules set by the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature. Besides that, the name must be unique. It has to be a combination of genus name and species name, but not one that already exists for any other animal. And finally, the name can't be rude. The ICZN states that no name should give offense on any grounds.
Who decides that, though? Because Linnaeus wasn't above using his power as the scientist who named most things to name, I think it was a toad and a stinky weed after a guy that he didn't like.
You can always debate whether naming horsefly Scapitia leoncea is a tribute or an insult.
Oh, wow. Wait,
horsefly? Leoncea? Well, actually, in India, there is a movement afoot to move away from Latin hegemony and celebrities. So there is no rule about using Latin. And what we're doing now is trying to make taxonomy inclusive of the culture, communities, and characteristics of places, for example, where the species are found. So, for example, a scientist in the hills of India's Western Ghats called Guru Raja KV, he's discovered 23 species of frogs, and one of them, for example, covers its eggs with mud to hide them from predators. So, since the local term for a potter, where this frog was found, is kumbara, this muddy little chap has been named night frog Nyctibatrachus kumbara. So he was like, why not try to also use indigenous knowledge and language and involve locals in conservation? So when Ramaswamy SRK discovered a new butterfly species in December 2023 in the Meghamalai Hills, he christened it the Sigaritis meghamalaynis after its location. And the Tamil word Meghamalai means subtropical evergreen forest, which we also call the cloud forests, and these are the ones that are found in the higher altitudes.
So listen, we're all Homo sapiens here, but Chavi, if you could name yourself this way, what would you call yourself?
So, I don't know if I would change it very much. My name has meaning, because I'm Indian, and most of our names evoke something. So Chavi is a poetic way of saying image or picture. And my last name is Sachdev, which if you break it down is Little God of Truth. So that truth part I like because I'm a journalist and a storyteller. But Chavi, maybe you should put something that works with audio instead of pictures, because I don't do anything with TV or film, right? Just radio and podcasts.
Christine?
I'm happy to be called Mundus versus Santo. And because Mundus, which means world, describes my refusal to be tied to any oneness and, live my effective
because I believe that I am. And it sounds like Chris, which is what my brother calls me. Looks means light. Sample means yellow, because it's my favorite color.
It's got a good medieval ring to it as well. Andre, if you're playing, have you got a name according to this new nomenclature?
I guess I would, if I had to really think about it from a chemistry perspective, I guess I would say, I like thinking about configuration of chirality, so I'm going to go with rectus for the R configuration. Rectus Andre.
Andre the Right.
Yes, exactly.
This is a point where I want to bring our listeners in. If anyone has a taxonomic name for themselves, then we'd like to hear it. Emails to unexpected@bbc.co.uk. Coming back to you, Professor Andre Isaacs, or should I say Rectus Andre from the College of the Holy Cross in Massachusetts. We've talked about your dance moves. We haven't actually talked about your field of research, organic chemistry. So let's start with the basics. What's that?
Yeah, organic chemistry, the revered subject, I would like to say, or the most challenging subject in colleges according to many students, but it really just covers carbon-based molecules, right? So carbon is really the building block of life, so anything involving carbon is really what we study. How to make carbon-carbon bonds, carbon-hydrogen bonds, carbon-halogen bonds, and building molecules like people build cars.
So that's organic chemistry. Within that field, you work on something called click chemistry, which has been described as being like molecular Lego, or Legos if you're American, which makes it sound like child's play. Is it?
I mean, I guess it is a form of child's play. So yeah, click chemistry is really just a concept, right? So if you think about how nature makes molecules, nature builds really complex systems and molecules really through the combination of very small library of other building blocks, if you think of molecules as building blocks. And the way we make molecules in chemistry is oftentimes not as simple or as elegant. And so Barry Sharpless came up with this idea that maybe we should try to imitate nature in a way by developing reactions that are kind of modular, right? You can take smaller building blocks and just click them together like Legos and have something that is fairly complex in a very simple transformation. And so that birthed the idea of click chemistry as a concept. But it really is one particular reaction that has kind of elevated itself in our eyes as the premier click reaction. And that reaction is the combination or the clicking of two Lego coupling partners, an alkyne and an azide. And you use copper to facilitate that reaction. And what that does is it takes those two specific types of molecules and brings them together to make what we call a triazole. And that's just a 5-membered ring of atoms that has 3 nitrogens and 2 carbons in that ring. And it is a powerful system that is found across all of science. People have used that particular system in agriculture, drug development, in material sciences. And Caroline Bertozzi won a Nobel Prize in 2022, along with Sharpless and Meldal, for using this reaction to study what's happening in the cell. So this chemistry is really, really clever. But for my lab, we actually use it a little bit differently. What we do is we actually manipulate the product of the click reaction to making other ring systems that also have nitrogen atoms in them. And some of these ring systems are also found in a lot of pharmaceutical drugs that actually are overrepresented with these nitrogen ring systems that we try to make. So basically the goal is to use this chemistry to aid in the pharmaceutical industry's efforts to making affordable drugs.
Andre, before I say goodbye, can I just get back to your TikToks and ask you?
Please.
Are you choreographing a dance routine currently?
Oh God! So there are quite a few dance routines that are being choreographed, and of course, some tracks on a new Beyonce album that we think we could find some chemistry connections to that we're working on. So yeah, we have our hands full.
Andre Isaacs, thank you so much for sharing with us. And, you know, people come for the Beyonce and they stay for the chemistry.
Thank you.
We always leave space for your letters and texts. And in last week's show, Colin got in touch with a question about why our hair grows the way it does. And it triggered more questions about the variety of hair types out there, which got me thinking about an edition of the World Service programme Crowd Science that I presented all about hair. I spoke to the wonderful Dr. Tini Lasisi at Penn State University, who told me that tightly curled hair could have been an important adaptation for human evolution. Tina did experiments to see if human hair really does help protect our brains from overheating. To do this, she needed help from Loughborough University in the UK.
They used this really creepy android called a thermal mannequin, and you basically can put clothes on it, or if you're me, you put a wig on it, and you basically measure how that is affecting its ability to lose and gain heat.
So Tina added an afro and straight hair wigs to these cyborgs and measured how much solar radiation was getting down to the mannequin's scalp, and she found a huge difference.
But let me tell you, I was shocked. What we found is that if you have tightly curled hair, that hair is able to protect you and that radiation doesn't travel all the way down to your scalp. And then you have straight hair, which puts you at a better spot than having no hair at all because it offers some protection, but at the same time, because straight hair fibers are all lined up, you know, so neatly packed next to each other, it also ends up insulating your head, so you can't lose heat as efficiently as you can if you had this curly structure that has all of these air pockets.
It's constantly amazing to me that evolution has come up with all these neat adaptations.
The difference between how straight hair actually retains heat, so it's perfect for winter, and curlier hair allows for cooling, which is perfect for tropical weathers. That was really mind-blowing. I feel a bit prouder now more than ever because I have evolved in this way.
Still to come, how an eclipse helped out Einstein's theory. After this. Welcome back to the Unexpected Elements quiz. Earlier on in the show, I asked about the hottest chili pepper on the Scoville scale, a scale developed to measure capsaicin, the chemical in chili peppers that produces a heat-like sensation. I asked, was it A, pepper X, B, Carolina Reaper, or C, the Trinidad Scorpion? All three are peppers hot enough to make you cry, but well done if you said A, pepper X. It was recently bred by Ed Curry to steal his own title from the Carolina Reaper peppers he also breeds, which used to top the Scoville scale with 2.2 million heat units. For comparison, that's 800 times hotter than a jalapeno. Pepper X averages 2.6 million Scoville heat units, and if anyone has tried one, please email unexpected@bbc.co.uk and let us know how it went. In amongst the emails and texts from you, sometimes there's a question to challenge the detective powers of the Unexpected Elements team. Cue music. Yes, it's time for Ask the Unexpected, and this week we've had a question from Gerald.
Hello, my name is Gerald Nduga, creative artist from Bosan. That is a region in northwest of Uganda. I'm a big fan of Unexpected Elements. Thanks to Manny for doing a fabulous job. Well, I have this question that keeps popping up into my mind. Is the earth shrinking? Think about human digging and mining to build skyscrapers, dams, and other mega construction projects.
Thank you, Gerald. That's a really interesting question. So, if we're taking stuff out of the Earth, is the Earth shrinking? Well, we've done exactly what you would expect and found someone who knows the answer. Here's David Rothery, Professor of Planetary Geosciences at the Open University.
This is an interesting question.
surface as the Earth's shrinking. But there is a way in which the Earth is shrinking. It's hot inside and is gradually cooling down as the radioactive heat supply decreases. Now, when solids cool down, they contract in size. It's called thermal contraction. So this very long-term cooling must result in the Earth shrinking a bit. We can see the effect of the planet shrinking through thermal contraction when we look at Mercury. That's the planet that I study. There are kilometre-high escarpments running across its surface called lobate scarps, which are where thrust faults reach the surface. You can think of them as like the wrinkles that form on, say, an apple when it dries out. The displacement across each thrust fault is typically 2 or 3 kilometres, and by mapping them out, we can work out that the whole planet has contracted in radius by about 7 kilometres in the past 3 billion years. Now, the Earth is probably cooling down a bit more slowly than Mercury because it's a bigger planet, but we still expect maybe about 1 kilometre of global contraction in the past billion years. The trouble is we can't see this on the Earth's surface because unlike Mercury, we have plate tectonics here. Plates are shifting around at speeds of centimetres a year. New materials added at mid-ocean ridges and destroyed at major thrust called subduction zones where continents are pushed over oceans. As a result, active thrust faults on Earth take only about 1 million years to move by an amount that would take 1 billion years for a thrust fault on Mercury. Any signal of global contraction in the Earth's crust is completely swamped by the faster and greater movements caused by plate tectonics. There is a further line of thought that Gerald's question provoked in me, which is that material is being added to the solid Earth all the time. This comes in the form of meteorite debris arriving from space. Most of it's in the form of dust-sized micrometeorites rather than as big lumps. Most people don't notice this, but about 150 million kilograms is added to the Earth every year. Sounds like an awful lot, but if you spread it out over the 500 million square kilometres of the Earth's surface, that's well less than 1 kilogram per square kilometre per year. And by my calculations, it would take about 1 billion years to bury the ground in a 10 centimetre layer of meteoritic dust. So to sum up, I'd say that the Earth is very, very slowly shrinking and becoming denser as it does, and the rate of addition of new material from space is nowhere near enough to compensate for this in terms of maintaining its size.
Thanks to David Rothery and to Gerald for the question. And if you have a question for the team, remember you can contact the show on unexpected@bbc.co.uk or WhatsApp us on +44 330 678 3080, or you can write to us, Unexpected Elements, BBC World Service, Cardiff CF10 4GA.
Take my sunglasses off. Wow! Oh my gosh!
The solar eclipse has been all over the news this week.
People have got their phones out, and it's just amazing. You can see it's like a halo around the sun and the moon. They're aligned, and it's now moving through the clouds.
Continue straight.
And we're in total darkness. Everyone has described it to me who've seen it, which is that it's indescribable. You can see it, I don't know what you're seeing, if you're seeing that sun and moon moving, but I can tell you what's happening here on the ground in the park. Children just standing up in complete awe. This is an area where families have come for the night and for the day to watch this huge phenomenon, and people are clapping. It's thrilling. It's a really thrilling moment.
I love that we clapped a big lump of rock for orbiting. Christina, I just want to ask, did anyone clap where you were?
Nobody was straight, but everyone had their arms up towards the sky during the eclipse. I guess it's a different way of acknowledging it.
But all of the eclipse hoo-ha made me think back to the news headline from the New York Times in 1919, so 100 and something years ago, 105 years ago, which ran, "Lights all askew in the heavens, men of science more or less agog over results of eclipse observations. Einstein's theory triumphs." Stars not where they seemed or were calculated to be, but nobody need worry.
I love this headline.
It's great. It's back in the day when headlines just kind of were in little chunks that just went on and on and on. Chavi, Christine, have you heard the story of the eclipse that proved Einstein's theory?
No, it sounds amazing, especially from the headlines.
I know. I love that nobody need worry. Reassuring words. The stars aren't where they're supposed to be, but New York Times says don't worry about it. Okay, let me share. It was 1990, and over African island of Principe, British astronomer Arthur Eddington was all set up for the eclipse. Only he wasn't really interested in the eclipse itself. He was interested in what else you could see once the sun was shaded by the path of the moon. Over 100 years later, on the BBC World Service, Science in Action presenter Roland Pease went down to an anniversary event at the Royal Astronomical Society to hear a talk from the same Arthur Eddington. Wait, what?
Well, he's not actually Arthur Eddington, he's actor Colin Utley, channeling the British astronomer who 100 years ago, 6 months after the end of the Great War, experimentally proved the theory of gravity developed by the German physicist Einstein. Let's keep listening.
Now, here on the Earth, the gravitational field is pretty weak, as I'm sure you'll understand. If we can find a body with a stronger gravitational force, then that could help us. So, the Sun, there's the first thing. 27,000 times the gravitational force of the Earth. So, what if some light from a distant object were to pass close to the Sun?
OK, so Eddington's getting close to explaining his 100-year-old observations, which have become one of the iconic tests of all science. For 4 years, the British astronomer had been in indirect contact with Einstein in Berlin via a Dutch intermediary, discussing the Germans' 1915 general theory of relativity. The key prediction of the theory was that light should follow a curved path if travelling close enough to a massive object. The Sun is massive enough, but of course, by day it outshines the light from any stars whose rays graze its surface. And that's why Eddington had fixated on an eclipse coming up on the 29th of May 1919, which could be seen from either side of the Atlantic, on Principe off the coast of Africa and at Sobral in Brazil. Eddington headed to Principe armed with telescopes and photographic plates to catch the event.
Eddington got lucky. The clouds parted and he took photographs. Back at the Royal Astronomical Society event, archivist Sharm Prosser showed these same pictures and the details of bending light, or to give it its proper name, gravitational lensing, that could be measured on them.
These are some of the most important eclipse images ever taken. These are positive plates, lantern slides from our collection.
And these were produced by Eddington and his colleagues who also went to Brazil. These were produced from that expedition.
Yes, that's right. So we've got 2 lantern slides showing the eclipse as it was photographed by Crommelin and Davidson from Sobral in Brazil, and 2 images showing the eclipse as it was seen from the island of Principe, and that was photographed by Arthur Eddington and Edwin Cottingham.
I mean, it's extraordinary to think that all that blackness there, you've got to pick out, amongst all the bits where it's not developed quite properly, you've got to try and pick out starlight that's come from the other side of the sun. It looks like a pretty tough job.
A really tough job. It took weeks, if not months, for Eddington and his colleagues to measure the plates accurately, to calibrate them, to make sure that they'd taken as accurate an observation as possible, so that they could prove the very small, I think it was 0.75 arc seconds of movement that was caused by the gravitational lensing, and they had to measure that so precisely, and it was only till they were really sure that they made the announcement on the 6th of November proving Einstein's theory of relativity.
So, to a stunned audience of scientists, on the evening of the 6th of November 1990, Eddington and colleagues presented their results, which overturned 200 years of Newtonian physics. Einstein's theory of gravitation, or general relativity, was confirmed, all thanks to an eclipse and a lot of hard work.
I would clap for that.
Yeah, exactly. Well done.
I would definitely put my arms up.
eclipses brings this episode of Unexpected Elements to an end. And on our transit, we've discovered that cowboys were black, that the banjo was African. Everything with a scientific Latin name might qualify for a different one. We've learned how to dance about chemistry. We've learned why hair is curly. There's some unexpected stuff in there. But that's us out of time. It just remains for me to thank this week's panel. In Mumbai, in India, we had Chavi Sachdev. Thank you very much, Chavi.
Mitela, Grand Tiger.
What language is that, Chavi?
Garo, which they speak in Meghalaya state.
And in Mexico, we have Christine Johannes. Thank you, Christine.
I'm
Marnie Chesterton. The producer was Tom Bonnet, with Harrison Lewis, Alex Mansfield, Elliot Prince, and Sol Whitney. Join us next week for more Unexpected Elements.
States' rights.
Whatever they decide must be the law of the land. In this case, the law of the state.
But later distanced himself from a decision by Arizona's Supreme Court to ban nearly all abortions in that state. New rules signal the end of the gun show loophole, and for millions, the sun and moon deliver a moment to remember. More on the roundup next time on 1A.
This morning at 9 on Public Radio 89.5.
Support for Public Radio Tulsa is provided by Chamber Music Tulsa, presenting the Dali Quartet, Sunday afternoon, April 21st at 3 in the Williams Theater of the Tulsa PAC, with a pre-concert lecture at 2:15. More information at chambermusictulsa.org.
Public Radio 89.5, KWGS HD1 Tulsa.
At 9 hours GMT, welcome to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. I'm Paul Moss, and in this edition we have an exclusive report from Sudan, where some areas already affected by war are now facing famine.
People are exhausted, bewildered. They are all suffering from hunger.
We'll hear from eastern Ukraine, where Russian missiles again threaten the country's energy supply. There's also a threat of an imminent Iranian attack on Israel. Japan's Prime Minister has given a stark warning to the US Congress.
China's current stance and military actions present the greatest strategic challenge.
We ask, how did a city in Switzerland end up with $1.5 billion to spare? Plus, the winners and runners-up at the annual International Awards for Video Games.
I'm here to save you again.
All that after a bulletin of international news.
Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. An international medical agency has found acute malnourishment to be so widespread in civil war-ravaged Sudan that it's double the threshold for a nutrition emergency. MSF screened tens of thousands of mothers and children in North Darfur's Zamzam camp for people displaced by the year-long conflict. It found 1/3 of them to be acutely malnourished, with at least one child dying every 2 hours. MSF's operations manager for Sudan, Dr. Abdallah Hussein, gave this warning.
We have a nutritional crisis. It's a catastrophic nutrition crisis.
Take the next
The
ride.
children that we screened in the camp of Zamzam is a tip of the iceberg. We're talking about only one camp. It could be much worse.
A top Chinese official is visiting North Korea in the highest level meeting for 5 years. The head of China's rubber stamp parliament, Zhao Zhili, has been holding talks with his North Korean counterpart, Choi Ryong-hae. From Seoul, Jean Mackenzie reports.
The last high-level meeting between the two countries was 5 years ago, when Kim Jong-un met Xi Jinping after his negotiations with Donald Trump broke down. Ever since, Washington and Pyongyang have been locked in a standoff over the North's nuclear weapons program. Kim Jong-un has instead sought to bolster his ties with both China and Russia. At their meeting, the two officials agreed to cooperate on politics, the economy, and culture, according to the North. China has long been accused of providing assistance to North Korea, violating international sanctions.
A court in Argentina has declared Iran a terrorist state guilty of a crime against humanity after finding it ordered 2 lethal attacks on Israeli and Jewish targets in Buenos Aires in the 1990s. It said the bombing of the Amia Jewish Center had been carried out by the Lebanese Hezbollah movement on orders from Tehran. 85 people were killed in the attack. The bombing of the Israeli embassy killed 29 people. The judges said Tehran had ordered the attacks after Argentina cancelled a deal on providing Iran with nuclear materials and technology. The US has restricted travel for its embassy personnel in Israel amid continuing fears that Iran may retaliate for the destruction of its consulate in Damascus. Staff have been told not to travel outside Greater Jerusalem. Tel Aviv and Beersheba. James Landale is in Jerusalem.
Israel today is very much in a holding pattern. Iran has promised to retaliate for the attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, the Syrian capital, last week. And as a result of that, there are now serious concerns, particularly in the United States, that Iran is serious when it says it will retaliate. And so the Americans and the Israelis are doing everything they can to try to deter that attack. There have been private diplomatic signals sent by the Americans through their allies in the Gulf to Tehran, saying, look, there must be restraint.
BBC News. President Biden has promised to defend the Philippines from any attack in the South China Sea, where its vessels have been repeatedly harassed by China. Hosting President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida at the White House, Mr. Biden said the US was solidly committed to mutual defense. China has criticized the trilateral summit. Ukraine says there have been more Russian airstrikes against its energy infrastructure. A facility outside Dnipro is ablaze after being hit by drone debris. President Putin has said airstrikes on the energy grid were part of Moscow's attempts to demilitarize Ukraine. Sarah Rainsford is in Kharkiv.
I think what we're seeing here now is clearly a sustained and a deliberate assault by Russia on Ukraine's energy system. And it started actually back in March. There were 2 massive attacks on this country with drones and missiles. But here in Kharkiv, destroyed all the power stations, essentially. So it left this city without power for some time. They've worked to restore it, but there are rolling blackouts here, a real limit on the amount of electricity available. Customers urged to avoid using too much. There's also generators everywhere you go on the streets.
The Russian authorities have expressed concern that the Kurgan region in western Siberia could be flooded in the coming days. The village of Kamenska is being evacuated after the water level on the Tobol River rose 1.4 meters overnight. Kurgan is a city of 300,000 people, which lies downstream. Thailand is warning drivers to be careful as the country kicks off its 7 dangerous days. A week of domestic travel around the Songkran Water Festival that typically leads to a spike in fatal road accidents. On Thursday, 60 people were killed, mainly on motorbikes, in pre-holiday travel, double the number of last year. More than 20 motorists have been killed so far today. That's the latest world news from the BBC.
You're listening to the newsroom with me, Paul Moss. Millions of people displaced, sexual violence endemic, and now what's described as a catastrophic hunger crisis. The conflict in Sudan has been called the world's forgotten war. It began last April when a rebel group known as the Rapid Support Force took up arms against the national government. Now, after a year of fighting, medical charity Doctors Without Borders says it's found a third of the people in one refugee camp were malnourished. If the war has been forgotten, that's partly because it's so difficult for outsiders to gain access, but the BBC has managed to get rare material from one affected area with the help of a local freelance journalist. Our correspondent Barbara Plett has this report.
Here in the Zamzam camp for displaced people, women and children are queuing for food. There isn't much of that, nor of clean water or health care. Illnesses that could once be treated now kill. One child here dies every 2 hours. Kisma Abdurrahman Ali Abu Bakr is 27 years old. She lost 3 children in 4 months.
I have 3 children who have died. My 3-year-old daughter died after 11 days of falling sick. The second one was 2 years old. He died from malnutrition. I couldn't take them to the hospital. After that, I had a daughter who died. She was 6 months old.
Zamzam is one of Sudan's oldest and largest camps, formed by those who fled ethnic violence in Darfur 20 years ago, so already fragile. But the latest war between the army and its paramilitary rivals has displaced more than 8 million people, blocked aid, and shut down the economy.
Because I have another boy, I came with him here. People are exhausted, bewildered, and hungry. They are all suffering from hunger. This is why they came here. People live on borrowing today to pay back tomorrow. This is how they survive. Our conditions are not allowing us to visit the doctor. We are all the same, just living like this.
The youngest casualties of Sudan's conflict are often not victims of bullets and bombs. This pediatric hospital in northern Darfur, close to Zamzam, is a front line in the country's hunger crisis. Dr. Ezzedine Ibrahim checks up on the patients. One woman has 6-year-old twins who've wasted away from chronic dysentery. She's feeding them with a syringe. The medical charity Doctors Without Borders is one of the last humanitarian agencies still on the ground in Darfur. In recent nutrition screening, it found that 1/3 of the children in Zamzam under the age of 5 are malnourished. So are their mothers. That and the collapse of health services caused many deaths, says Dr. Prince Juma Safari. He's the group's deputy medical coordinator in Sudan.
There is need everywhere. They need water, they need food, some of them need shelter, and now we know that we have a lot of challenges for supply. If the situation continues like that, the situation will become very catastrophic.
As bad as the situation is in Zamzam, other parts of Darfur are even more cut off and desperate. I spoke to a regional emergency worker who sent us photographs from the southern and central states. One shows an emaciated little girl said to have died last month. Another, an equally wasted little boy. His mother, Fatima Mohammed Athman, recorded a video pleading for help to feed her 10 children. They are living between starvation and death, she says. Aid workers say it won't be possible to turn the tide on this catastrophe unless there is much greater access, a surge of food supplies, and the return of more humanitarian agencies. If the war stretches into another year, many, many more children will die.
Barbara bled Usher. It's been reported that Iran will launch an attack on Israel within the next 48 hours. The Wall Street Journal was quoting an unnamed source who had apparently been speaking to the Iranian leadership. Iran's been threatening to retaliate ever since its consulate in Syria was destroyed last week. Most observers assuming that Israel was responsible. The spokeswoman for the Pentagon, Sabrina Singh, again made it clear Israel could count on American support.
The president said we have an ironclad commitment to protecting Israel and their self-defense. So if any incoming attacks were to be targeted or come in the vicinity of U.S. forces, you've seen U.S. forces engage. You've seen us do dynamic strikes that we continue to do in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden when the Houthis have launched missiles at commercial vessels. Those are what we call dynamic strikes. That's what you could see. We don't know what an attack might look like. All I can tell you is that we remain postured and ready should our forces be attacked.
Well, that's the view from Washington. Let's turn now to Jerusalem and our correspondent Hugo Bachega. Hugo, I know people in Israel are, to say the least, used to the threat of missile or bomb attack, but how has the latest threat gone down? I mean, are people making preparations there?
Well, this obviously has become a huge topic here, but I haven't seen any sign of panic, people making additional preparations. There hasn't been any run on shops, banks. The instructions for the public haven't really changed. I think last week we saw the first indications, that Iran was planning a response, and the military here cancelled leave of combat units, it boosted air defense teams. But apart from that, I haven't seen any kind of difference in preparations from the population.
There's a risk, I know, of sounding way too sanguine, but the fact is that Iran has made this kind of blood-curdling threat before. Do we know how credible this one is?
Well, so this is what the Americans are saying, right? They say that this response is a matter of when, not if. So I guess they are very confident that they've gathered intelligence information to indicate that this is what the Iranians are planning to do. And this reminds me a lot of, of what happened before the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, when they publicly shared information essentially saying, we know what you're planning to do. So these are the warnings. Even President Biden has said that the Iranians are planning a significant attack, but we don't know how this is going to be. But I think, the attack that happened in Syria was humiliating for Iran because it was a strike on an Iranian diplomatic compound that killed several military advisors, including a top Iranian general. So the Iranians have vowed to respond, and I think they need to be seen as giving a response, a retaliation. So for them, I think this needs to be something different and big.
We know that there have been these efforts all around the region and in the US to stop the Gaza conflict escalating into a regional one, which is what such an attack would represent. I mean, are the efforts continuing at, might well be this sort of very last hour?
Yeah, so we're seeing the warnings, public warnings, especially from the Americans, also from the Israelis, but there has been a lot of diplomatic activity as well to try to de-escalate the situation. So the US Secretary of State has urged countries to tell Iran to reduce tensions. The foreign ministers in the UK, Germany, Australia have phoned the Iranian foreign minister to essentially say, don't attack Israel. So it is a dangerous moment. The Americans are saying this is imminent. So I guess a lot of people are just waiting to see what is going to happen.
Hugo in Jerusalem, thank you very much indeed. Now, I'm sure this is a problem familiar to many of you listeners. What do you do if you find yourself with $1.5 billion going spare? That's the challenge, if you could call it that, which faces the Swiss canton of Geneva. It's collected so much tax that the city authorities aren't sure what to do with it. Free public transport for young people is one of the suggestions. Mark Bretton's lived in Geneva for over 30 years. He told us about the government's plans.
They promised to lower taxes from 2025 onwards. And as a sort of cherry on the cake, really, they offered free transport for the under 25s. We welcomed all this good news. But the question is, if all goes